This is how I got to 10% body fat without tracking calories. I tried to lose fat for months by tracking and limiting my calorie intake, but I stayed at 15% body fat and did not lose any weight. I only got to 10% body fat by ditching the calorie tracking and instead focusing on calorie burn. So first, there is this issue with tracking calories. The issue is that it is so difficult to ensure that you're tracking your calories accurately. If you wanted to be in a 300 calorie deficit, it is so hard to actually make sure you're eating 300 calories less than you're burning. You've got to have exact measurements of the foods that you're eating. So it involves you having to get the scales out and weigh your food every single time you want it to eat. You need to have nutritional and calorie information for all the foods you eat as well. And not all foods have that information. If you wanted to eat fruit, for example, fruit doesn't come with a label saying how many calories are in that particular apple, for example. So the calories you end up inputting are just a guess. In those circumstances where you do actually have a label on the foods that you're eating, that calorie information can be off by about 20%. The manufacturers of these foods are allowed to be off by this 20% range, which again feeds into this inaccuracy in your calorie input. Those apps that have the calorie information as well, when you're inputting it into your phone, like when you're using MyFitnessPal, the information they have on there is also inaccurate and it might not have the right information for that specific food that you're eating. So again, you're just using estimates, which tend to be way off. So if you wanted to be in a calorie deficit, and let's say you need to be eating 2,000 calories every day to do that, the calories that you're inputting into these apps by tracking can be off by 20%, which means you can be eating 2,400 calories as opposed to 2,000 calories. And if you're burning 2,200 calories every day, that's the difference between being in a deficit and being in a surplus. I also know that for a lot of people, including myself, that having to go to the extent of weighing everything you eat and tracking everything you eat is just very burdensome and isn't feasible for a lot of people. And if you want to properly track your calories, you have to input everything, which means you have to input the sauces that you're putting in your food, the cooking oils that you're using in your food, and things like the milk that you put in your coffee. And that's just such a pain. Now, look, don't get me wrong. If tracking calories works for you and you have no issue with going to that extent of inputting everything you're eating, then by all means, go for it. If it works for you, it works for you. But I think the reality is that for most people, it's just not feasible and something that can be stuck to over the long term by most people. So that's what happened to me. I was stuck at 15% body fat. I was tracking my calories and I wasn't losing weight because I wasn't tracking it accurately because it's just too hard. The solution is ditching the calorie tracking and increasing your calorie burn. The easier way to go about fat loss is just by increasing your calorie burn to achieve a calorie deficit. And I think generally our bodies are pretty intuitive. If you just ate to your heart's content, I think most people would find that they're eating at maintenance. The calories that they intake would be more or less the same as they're burning. And so their weight would stay the same. And when you introduce cardio and those extra calories that you're burning because of that, it means you're going to be in a calorie deficit without having to go to that extent of thinking about all these small things that you're eating and limiting your calories and tracking your calories. You can eat generally to your heart's content and you'll be losing weight because you'll be put in a deficit because of the cardio you're doing. So for example, let's say your basal metabolic rate, which is the amount of calories you burn at rest, is 2,000. If you just focused on limiting your calorie intake and tracking your calories, you would have to be eating less than 2,000 calories every day. And that is, as I've said, very difficult to accurately do. But if you focus on increasing your calorie burn instead, let's say you burn an extra 400 calories by spending 45 minutes incline walking on the treadmill. To be in a calorie deficit, you have to eat less than 2,400 calories. And naturally, you'll be eating around that 2,000 calorie mark because that's just what your body intuitively wants to eat. When your basal metabolic rate is 2,000, your body just intuitively knows that it should intake 2000 calories to maintain weight. But when you introduce the extra 400 calories burnt and the cardio, you're burning 2400 calories, but your body still just consumes 2000 calories. And so you're in a deficit and you don't have to go to the extent of tracking everything you eat, which is flawed because it's so inaccurate. It's a much easier way to go about fat loss because you don't have to think about tracking every single thing that you eat. You don't have to whip out the scales every time you want to eat anything. You don't have to be scanning barcodes of foods and then inputting it into your app on your phone. You don't have to look at calorie labels anymore. There's no need to do any of that stuff when you're doing the cardio. So if you were just to do 45 minutes of cardio every day, which doesn't have to be strenuous cardio either, it can be stuff like walking on the treadmill at an incline, you'll achieve a calorie deficit by increasing your calorie burn. And that doesn't rely on tracking, which is flawed. There's this argument that, well, if you're doing all this extra cardio, well then aren't you just going to be hungrier and eat back all the calories you've previously burned? The answer to that is no. I don't think that's the case. While you might get hungrier because you've done extra cardio and burned extra calories, I don't think that the extra calories you burn are proportionate with any extra calories you might consume because of that. So for example, let's say you went on the treadmill for 45 minutes and burnt 400 calories. I don't think that means that you automatically eat back an extra 400 calories. While you might be hungrier because of that, you might only eat back an extra 200 calories. So if we go back to the example where your basal metabolic rate is 2000, and because of the increased cardio you're doing, you're burning an extra 400 calories. So to be in a deficit, you have to eat less than 2400 calories. And because you've done that cardio, you might feel a bit hungrier, but not 400 calories worth of hungry. You might only eat an extra 200 calories because you've done that cardio. And so if you're eating 2200 calories, then you're still in a calorie deficit and you're going to still lose fat. Look, I honestly think that you just need to be smart about it. Just because you've done cardio, don't see that as a license for you to go and eat whatever you want. Don't see it as a license to go buy an almond croissant because you've gone for a run. Just stick to what you'd normally be eating regardless. And I think you'll be just fine. So if you learned anything from this video, please consider subscribing because we are getting to 10K subs soon. And I'll see you in the next one.